Kia ora. Hello and welcome to the 2023 Changing Threads Contemporary Textile and Fibre Art Awards. So we're really delighted that you've chosen to come and have a look at the exhibition, and I think you'll agree that we have some very exciting works. The whole point of the Changing Threads exhibition from the very beginning has been to challenge the public's perception of fibre and textile art, so we try to use it in the wider sense of the use of the word fibre, and really to encourage people to have a very conceptual basis to their work, but to think outside of the square. So if you'd like to join me, we're just going to go from piece to piece with a few comments that seem relevant, and I hope you enjoy the show. Okay, so this lovely piece is by Sarah Reid from Wellington, and Sarah was our Merit Award winner. What we really liked about this piece was the fact that often when you're using text, it can be a distraction in a piece of work, but we really liked the fact that we can all identify with this piece of work because of that. Sometimes we prefer to make our own narratives, but this piece uses the words that everybody can relate to in these times, and the shimmering surface helps to break up the form of the words with the tiny beading. It sort of sparkles and shimmers, but as you draw closer there's a real sense of interest in all the small areas. So you have a feeling of the time that's involved with it, and it feels as if she really has taken time out from her general daily life to focus on something particularly. Okay, so Morag's piece, Morag Dean from Takaka, and it's a series of 3 small pieces, and it's to do with her daily walk and collections of things. So they're exquisitely arranged, so actually compositionally they're really beautiful, but we really liked the fine detailing that was set up. And there are a lot of people who are working with collections of things and natural materials, but we actually liked the way that the pieces speak to each other. So originally they were submitted as 3 entries, but we felt that they actually worked better as one piece. So when you look closer, there are a lot of really fine details in here, and some of the fine things like the seeds and then the placement of some of the leaves. So you have a sense of order and construction, but at the same time it's very calm and very peaceful. Okay, Cindy Walter from Auckland has used these 3 little skulls to put a piece which talks about belonging, it talks about gender identity. So the skulls have been ethically sourced through the conservation, but she's treated them in a really quirky way. So we feel we really want to explore closer, but at the same time, that whole macabre feeling of death and movement. So she has a cat, a wallaby, and a possum skull, but within each one of them, she has a little bit of quirkiness. There are little knitted hearts, ice creams and mushrooms in one of them. So they also have the reference to things like the girl with a pearl earring, which we found quite fascinating. So it really is a reason where you actually want to look and think, what is the artist trying to tell us? So the whole piece as 3 skulls gives a feeling of cohesion, whereas like one may have been lost, but the 3 together work perfectly. So it's both quirky and it's quite exciting to see something like the skulls being used in quite a new way. Now I really love this piece. It's by Val Griffith-Jones, who is based in Picton, and Val describes herself as being 77 and anxious, and so this piece called No Rest Home is really well constructed. At first glance you just see the chair, but as you get closer you see how Val has very cleverly played with scale and tonal quality, so the little figure sitting in the chair seems to totally disappear into the background, and that was how she was feeling. So the little feet coming down in the crochet slippers, just as a little sense of who's still sitting there, and the little granny black blanket that we can all identify with the old Afghans, Afghan rugs and things that we've all made and crocheted. So it really is a very poignant piece and says everything it needs to in a very simple way, but it's so beautifully executed and thought through, so we really enjoyed this piece. Okay, so Colleen Plank is one of our Nelson artists, and she's been a repeat entrant over the last few years, and she always comes up with something very interesting. And this piece is about her walks on the boulder bank. So she's done a lot of machine stitching, and some of the areas have been cut away and some have been left there. So we have that feeling of stones shifting and moving. The shadow play say is a really exciting part of this piece, and it's an interesting play on the scale because it works beautifully at this size, but it could just as easily have been a really large piece or a very small piece, and it would have been equally as successful. So we really liked the way that the lightness of it belies that feeling of the whole boulder idea. So it plays backwards and forwards with the shadows and the stitching itself. So this piece by Carolyn Macquarie from Wellington is called Bullock Creek, Buller District, and it actually won our second prize, our Award of Distinction. So it's a really beautiful interpretation of an old photograph, but at the same time it also has that feeling of the old engravings and sepia tones and the grey tones. Compositionally it's really interesting. The idea behind this for Caroline was she had taken the photograph, which can be a really instant way of looking at a scene, and by reworking that into the tapestry and the fine work that she has done, it means that she engages with that photograph in a different way. So things have slowed down, time has slowed down, and so some of the details, fine details of the photograph are lost, but in the same time the tapestry then gives you an extra dimension. So in the background part in here, we were talking about it with her the other night, so see there how the warp threads and the weft threads work together to give a shimmer and a sort of a shadowing which you wouldn't have in the photograph. So it was a very clever interpretation with a traditional technique of tapestry, but taking it to quite a different level. So it really responds well when you start to look very, very finely into the details here. So it's a beautiful piece and beautifully presented. Occasionally when you have a piece that's framed, something like the dark frame would have really sort of killed the image in the middle, but we felt that this all worked so well in cohesion, and allowing the mount around it gives the work time to breathe. So it's a really beautiful piece and certainly worth our award. So this piece is by Sherril Jennings from Napier. Really poignant piece. In fact, when we were opening the pieces, it made both Anya and I cry. So this piece is referencing the death of Sherril's husband a few years back, and it's her way of working through the grief process. So it's called Last Threads. So the way that the little bottles are placed are all part of Sherril's work, and the broken thread, you know, it's that thread that's lost. And we really thought that this worked beautifully on different levels, because you have the very fine lawn handkerchief, you know, with the black edging, which was very traditional in Victorian times, you know, having black edges on the handkerchiefs or black clothing. So you have that sense of poignancy, but with the beautifully executed figure in the centre, it's also something that draws you in. You actually feel that there is a celebration and a joyfulness and a cutting of the last thread. So beautifully worked. The interesting thing with this particularly is that Sherril's used chain stitch to do the embroidery, and that was chain stitch as chains as a linking and a holding on to and a joining. So it really means that you are thinking through each thread as you're working through that thread, and that each chain stitch is there for a reason. So it's a beautifully executed piece. So yeah, it's a real celebration of his life. So this is the second entry by Val Griffith-Jones, who gave us that beautiful little chair before in No Rest Home. Another really poignant piece looking at old age and moving forward and rest homes and all that sort of thing. So what we really liked here was the central chair piece with the little feral vest in there, the fact that there is no figure sitting inside the chair. It's actually just the vest itself. It gives us a sense of passing and time moving on, and you know, who was the person who would have worn that vest. So I think it's things that we all identify with as time moves on. You think we all have grandparents or elderly friends or relatives who will move forward, but again, Val's work is always beautifully executed, and I think even just the central panel here works beautifully. It's very poignant, and yeah, it gives us a whole lot of questions in our mind about, you know, who would have been the person who sat in that chair. So Sandra Brooks is from Wellington, and this piece uses really effective use of the Japanese kozo paper. So it has a linen warp and the kozo paper weft. So it's all about passages and ebb and flow, and if you look very carefully you'll see how the different weave she's used has actually given you that feeling in the background of the texture and the movement. So there's that central piece here, could be a path or it could be a waterway, and then using this area in here with the change of the weave, we have the sense of pebbles and rocks and stones as we move through, so your eye follows the piece through beautifully, and she has that different tonal quality because of the changes of the paper and the changes of the weave. So it's a very effective piece. It would have been nice just against the wall, I think, but it's really beautiful the way it hangs, and again beautifully executed, because kozo paper is not an easy thing to use, and it's certainly not a common thing to be used, so it's nice to see different materials coming through. So Jazz Danis is a young Nelson artist, and I had the pleasure of meeting with her on Friday night at the opening and talking with her about the pieces. So we really loved the folk quality and the naivety of these pieces, but they are so beautifully executed. I think she's done an exceptional work, so we liked the fact that they reference some of the traditional styles of folk art embroidery, but taken in a whole new way. So this lovely piece here, for example, this is her dogwood seeds grown in my belly, and the dogwood flowers coming through are really, really beautifully stitched, but each of the profiles is slightly different, and then using the deer hide here, they're almost bird-like quality to the figures themselves, so it's about storytelling and how the words come forth and grow, so we need to be aware of the words we use and the stories we tell. So having that quirkiness is quite a deliberate thing from her side of, on the design basis. This is her second piece here, Blood Always Flows Home, and again it's about grounding and using these lovely threads here to represent blood flowing down into the earth, and that gives us that stability and our grounding for our growth, but then the words coming forward from this gorgeous little figure flowering through, so our words have power and energy. So both of them are really beautifully done, and I think there's like a simplicity to them. They are actually far more powerful than what they seem at first glance. So it's lovely to see young people coming through and taking traditional things into their own sphere of experience. So Val Griffith-Jones, who gave us the chairs and the rest home, has given us a slightly different interpretation here in her pieces lines 1 to 5. So it's very unusual for one artist to have 3 entries, which are all accepted, but we felt that each one of them had something to offer the exhibition. So these light ethereal pieces are done on a really fine lawn, and they were designed to move and shift and throw shadows differently. So looking at them, there's the fine hand embroidery of different lines and patterns, and it's all about the movement through life at the moment and what's happening with us all. You know, we've all got complications, we're all following our minds and our hearts to try and make sense of the times we're living in. And so they're little explorations with the colour and with the pattern, and you know, where are we going, where have we been. So quite a complicated sense of the movement on the pieces, but as a whole it hangs very simply. So Sue Hayden is one of our Nelson artists who always gives us work which is very considered, very well resolved, and has a great thought behind it. So her work here is very, very challenging for some people. The comment I had the other night was, well, why is that fibre and textile? But for me it totally fulfills what it is we wanted to say, which was to challenge the public's perception of fibre and textile, and this piece definitely does this. So she's used the wire in a form where she's wrapping and twisting, and it's exactly the same as you would use any form of thread or other fibre that you might use, but this is actually added to that whole sense of fragility, even though it's something as strong as a wire. And with the little pieces of clay, I mean, it's definitely organic based, because you know, all our soil is based from things that have rotted down and become part of the ground in the area that we live in. So the clay from this area is from the Bishopdale area itself, so this is very much a Nelson grounded piece, and she talks about it in the catalogue really clearly, but there's a lightness and a fragility to it which really belies the fact that, you know, we're talking about earth and clay and wire. The shadow play is part of this as well that we felt was really enhanced the work, because with the whole idea of clay and soil types breaking down, you think back to the past. So the shadow is a reflection of what the work is, but it's also referencing back to the past and time moving on. So I think it's a very well resolved piece, and we're really thrilled that she has shared something that is really challenging for a lot of people to see why that was on the show. So this is the first of Pam McKinley's works, and Pam is from Dunedin, and this one is called Farewell to Haupapa. Absolutely exquisite weaving, and we love the use of the threads because obviously it's to do with, you know, Antarctica and climate change and things. So the different weave coming through is similar to the piece before with Sandra Brooks, as far as the weave is given a feeling of texture and change, and so we have the same thing through here. But with these beautiful threads she uses, there's a shimmer over the whole piece, and your eye explores up the larger panels and comes back to the central photograph and then goes back to explore it. And we have a sense of calm in space, but also a breaking down because of the way that the pieces here have been woven, and there are threads that hang. There's movement through the top of the whole piece, and it just feels very well considered. Sarah Pumphrey from Nelson is actually one of the other artists who has 2 works which were accepted. So Sarah's work is always really exciting to see. So at the moment she's very much involved with mark making quality, and so both this piece and her other piece are to do with a sense of place and a sense of where she lives, and just again a grounding of the area we're in. So she's used all sorts of things to make marks on the surface of the pieces of canvas, like dragging it through her father's workshop and running it along the ground where she lives, using charcoal from her area. And these pieces here, this piece is called Fragments, and with the small contained areas, each one of them is different, but wants you to engage on quite a different way, so you feel like you want to move forward and explore. So having added stitch to them, each one of them creates a small landscape piece within itself. But when you step back, you know, you have that feeling of the whole piece, and again it is an exploration of the shapes and the colours. We really liked the fact that it had this grounded darker area moving up to the light, so it reflects back to a landscape where you'd have lakes and mountains and things, and then moving up to the sky. So that very subtle colourway, it gives you a sort of push-pull feeling. So it could be quite repellent and quite dark, but the sense of lightness in the upper pieces means that you actually felt quite uplifted by the time you've actually explored the whole work visually. And these lovely pieces by Rachel McMillan, who lives over on the west coast, she's in Greymouth, and they give a really strong sense of power, and they're very much about the sense of place. So she's referencing the colours of the plants that are in the area where she lives, particularly the dandelions. But we really liked the way that each section has been very well considered. So by the wrapping of the silk thread, you know, there is a shimmer and a lightness to what could be quite a heavy thing. So using the wood as the basis, I mean, it could have actually been quite a say heavy, strong piece, but that gives the sense of lightness with that the colours that are used, and there's a glow to it because of the silk. So it's a piece that could have had several more pieces, would just be as effective, but the 3 strong pieces, each one's different, so it allows us to explore her landscape and her thought patterns. We really enjoyed them. So Maggie J is a Nelson artist who always gives us something really exciting. Maggie likes to play with materials which contrast the very hard masculine materials of things like wire and particularly copper wire she uses, and some of the softer materials and the raffia and the wrapping. So this piece is about down the rabbit hole, the curiouser and curiouser, with the Alice in Wonderland theme. It has a fabulous sense of shadows behind here where you really do want to just come through the centre of this tunnel and what happens when you move forward. So as a piece with the size of it, I mean, it's another piece a bit like Colleen's, where the scale of the work could have been 3 times, 4 times as much as this, and it still would have been very successful. And the manipulation of those very harsh materials and the very soft materials, she likes to play with the masculine, feminine side of things. So I think even as a study for a larger work, it's very successful, and we really liked the patterning of the whole piece combined with these beautiful shadows through here. And when you come from here and looking at the shadows, you have that sense of like cross stitch, so it's their woman's side of things, traditional stitching, but then you've also got these very powerful, almost architectural hoops and loops. So a really lovely piece from Maggie. So Leanne Rogerson has given us a really interesting piece here. It's using some of the discarded plastic strapping that you would get, you know, around parcels and things like that, and cotton thread. So it hangs as a statement to how hard things would have been to actually manipulate and work that. So it references back to women's work and that whole sense of embroidery and teaching young women particularly, you know, to do the fine stitching. So it's called sampler, and we have that sense of the fact that it is a sampler that is a contemporary sampler, but it still references back to the samplers of the past. The shadow play with the way it's hung really makes you want to move forward and explore the whole piece. It's quite beautiful the way it sits on the wall, and I think it gives a real sense of timelessness to the whole work. So this fabulous piece by Giles Panting, who's from Mapua, has been the winner of our Benina Award. So this is a really exciting piece. You have that very strong graphic quality that you immediately see, but it's the lovely sense of playing with scale. So he's referencing the lace that was in the 16th and 17th century portraits. Giles in it is English, and so that has really come through all the art background that he's seen in the paintings over the years. So it's a fabulous play with scale, but the actual way he's worked it has been really intriguing. So it's a sense of looking back at the lace work of the past, but with the cut work side of things, the way it's been done, where the white fabric has been adhered to the black and then cut away. So it's again very laborious, the same that the lace would have been made in the time. And even just the fact that we see his working in the same way that you would see the working of the lace if you go to somewhere like the museum in Brussels. So the red threads that sit across the surface, it's to hold things down as you're working, and that's what you see in the museum when you start to look at the lace patterning. So this whole sense of scale is fabulous with it, and when we first look, it gives a lot of impact, but the closer we get and the more we look at the detail, we're really impressed with Giles's thought patterns and the way that he has presented this to us. So this piece by Yoke Helwes-Martens, who's an Auckland artist, is based on the paintings that were done, the encaustic style paintings over 2,000 years ago in Egypt. So this piece is called After Fayum, Portrait 1. So it was one of 2 pieces. So we really enjoyed the way that she was using the very raw bandages that had been dyed through to give that feeling of that sense of the Egyptian mummy or the sarcophagus. So these paintings were done in Egypt before the person died, often several years beforehand, and they were then placed over the top of their sarcophagus or their coffin, so it gave those that were left behind a sense of who had been there. It was a way of remembering those people in quite a different way from some, like we might have photographs these days, whereas in those days obviously that wasn't possible. So by painting their portrait, that was a way of remembering them as they were. And yeah, it has all sorts of interesting stitching in this background area here, and this area up the back here has got a lot of long stitch, so it creates a wonderful sense of texture and depth. So these lovely pieces by Ailey Snow from Auckland are really in Ailey's usual style as far as being beautifully executed. Each one is a little concentration of a sense of time. So she's interacted with each of her materials, she's thought carefully about the stitching she's used to make each piece a very considered and well-resolved little pot. Inside she has pieces of fabric that she's obviously stored or got from different places, and inside there are little pieces that have words on them. Some of them have been dyed in an interesting way, and so they work as a cohesive whole. And she's done a lovely colour palette here where we have the flowing from the earth colours through to the sky. So it's a sense of thinking about our sense of place and what we're doing. At the same time, you want to come closer and you want to explore each one, and they have the tiny fine details which we've really enjoyed with the birds inside, and here we've got some cross stitch and things, so each one is a cohesive little whole in itself. Okay, so this piece by Stephanie Campbell, who's an Auckland artist, is called A Girl from Glossop. So obviously it's a tribute to Vivienne Westwood, and we rather liked the whole craziness of the piece and the way it's referenced some of the things that Vivienne Westwood would have used with her pattern making and the pieces of lace and the whole sense of over-the-top fun that's part of the whole thing. And she made the quote on the surface there about, "Yeah, I've never thought it powerful to be a second-rate man. Femininity is stronger," and she has those words on the surface of it, so just a nice bit of fun for that piece. So this beautifully executed piece is by J. Hutchinson from Dunedin, and we have that quirkiness of the detritus of modern society. So here's a cookie time cookie wrapper that's been presented to us in the way that we actually want to look at it in a quite a different way. So from seeing it lying on a piece of pavement or on the side of a rubbish bin, having the piece kept within the frame but in the lower corner means you actually want to move forward and explore it, and what makes this a precious object, you know, because we have that feeling of something that is really special being presented to us. Say beautifully executed work, and we just liked the space that he'd given it. It would have been a more obvious thing to have put it sort of in a more central area or fill the whole frame, but by focusing down on that corner it works extremely well. So Marina McPherson has given us one of the series of works that she's working on at the moment to do with musical icons. And this piece is Punk Rockers, and it is so well executed. You know, it's the unusual way of working that she distorts things, she plays with the scale, and things are not necessarily perfectly structured as far as anatomically, but we want to engage with it. We want to find out what is she thinking about in the pieces, and looking at some of the details here, such as his lovely tartan pants and her skirt. You know, they have that slightly quirky look to it where things are almost punk rocker, but they're not quite right. So we have the sense with the tattoos, for example, and you know, why is that tattoo placed there? So it's a really good sense of fun, and we liked the fact it flicked across to the girl from Glossop, so Vivienne Westwood and that whole slightly interesting way of society at that time. So yes, I think she's done a really good job with this piece. So Vicky Smith is a Nelson artist who's very involved with her community arts, and this is a piece which references her interests in environmental issues. So commodity and playing with the tea. So she's made these beautiful little bowls. So these are referencing, you know, the small Japanese teacups that were used in ceremonies, and the tea bags that are in here are part of a project that she had been working on with other group, where the tea bags have actually been put into the sand, into the soil at different times and different places, and so their decomposition is part of the whole thing. And she's also made this lovely little canister, which again refers to the fact that it was like a tea canister and something being held in something precious. By placing something like this on a high pedestal in a huge gallery here, it means you actually want to come in closer and you want to find out more about it, and you want to explore, well, why is something here focusing when you've got all the pieces on the walls around it. So it really does warrant having a closer inspection. Right, this exquisite piece is by Alison Luani from Wellington. Alison was an entrant last year with a beautiful piece, and we were thrilled to have this piece submitted this year. So her execution is just outstanding. So this piece actually is using paper as the base, and we're in awe of her work, because when you're working with something like that with embroidery stitches, I mean, one little tension problem and you've torn the paper and basically you can't do it again. So from that side of it is interesting. But she's actually used her Samoan heritage to refer to some of the patterns that you would see on things like the tapa cloth around her. But having these wonderful little shimmer happening with the copper threads coming through on the surface means your eye moves over it and comes back to explore it again. So we have the blues, which could be seen as being waterway, and then the other colours with the ochres and the greens and the browns, which would refer to the land around us. So maybe this shimmer is meant to represent the sun coming through. Not quite sure, it's part of your own narrative that you can form, but the whole execution of the piece is just outstanding, and would really like to recommend her for her work that she's done. It's beautiful. So this is Sarah's second piece. Sarah had the lovely piece, The Fragments, that we saw earlier. So this piece is called Lament, and a very large piece of canvas here. So an interesting piece of fabric in itself. We really liked the fact that she hadn't tried to make the edges of the piece perfect. It's all part of the whole mark making, the looseness of it. So she's dragged it through the land near her and through her father's workshop, so it's a way of memory coming into a piece. It's a consideration of where each mark is placed, but also allowing things to happen, and an exploration of the surface with charcoal and other tools that she may have found around her. When you step back and look through, you can see there's mountain ranges which echo the area where she lives over in the Moutere here, but lots of really interesting things happening in the surface, even as far as the marks of the creases that are set in here. We have that sense of landform and a sense of connection with the past. So Adele McNutt from Auckland has a really wonderful way of just capturing a moment. And so this piece that she's worked on is called Waiting, and it's about the bus stop at Karangahape Road. And we really want to engage with each of these figures. They're beautifully executed, they're quirky the way she's placed them, and we have recognised some of the characters there. We think, oh yeah, I've seen someone be like that. Or we even liked the references here, which is like a historical reference to the Botticelli painting with the three graces, and we have the thinker and other references coming through, and some of them are a little ambiguous, like the little characters here. What is that? Is that a coat on somebody? And somebody suggested it was almost like an animal waiting with them, so perhaps it's a dog. But a lot of interesting details in the background here. She's got some screen printed panels, so it grounds the work, and we actually really want to come closer and start to see, well, who are those people and what are they doing? So we felt it was a great snap of a sense of time and moment. So this is the second piece by Adele McNutt. So she gave us the piece Waiting, the Karangahape Road quilt, and this one's all about the proliferation of cones that we have around the country at the moment. We liked the play with the idea of the cold shoulder. We don't really want them around our area, but we've got them everywhere, trying to keep our cities going and our small towns going, and that constant sense of movement and interruption. And that's how we feel these days, that our lives have been interrupted, and we have that sense of, we just want to stop and be. We don't want to have all this stuff going around us, but unfortunately it's become part of our daily lives. So Anya Whitlock, who is from Auckland, has given us an interesting piece, and it's intriguing on lots of levels. The deer head has become quite a common motif in society and in art over the years, but she's decided to take a slightly different twist on it, and using things like this area here where she's got almost like a log cabin quilted pattern, which gives us that feeling of home. Log cabin is all about the hearth and home, so she's playing with the whole masculine feminine thing. So we have the masculinity of the strong deer head and the antlers, and the femininity not only of the sense from the log cabin pattern, but also the colour palette she's used, which is soft and subtle, which also we felt referenced some of the Renaissance style colouring. It's that beautiful sense in the centre with the brocade, which is, it gives lushness and richness to the piece. We really liked the shadow play against the wall. It actually helped give us that feeling where the deer was really grounded in its sense of place. So he's looking out into the rest of the gallery with quite an aloof expression, but beautifully moulded. So each of these areas here with her very fine lines is so well constructed. And you really have a sense that the piece has been considered and well resolved right from the beginning. So Natalie Holland is another Wellington artist. Now this is a piece which is almost verging on the quite traditional for an exhibition like this, but we really thought she had considered carefully the patterning. So she is of Niuean heritage, and it's referencing tapa cloth patterns. So the very bright colours of the orange and the strong pink playing off against each other is about the sunrise, sunset colours of her area. And that's the same thing with the patterning she's used. They're traditional patterns that reference both sunrise and sunset. So with the punch needle technique, it's not usually a way that you would expect to see in an exhibition like this. So, but that's the reason that we selected that work, was it's starting to show us something slightly different from the usual traditional punch needle pattern, and she's used her heritage to good advantage here. And Viktoria Karaman is from Auckland. She's given us quite a deceptively simple piece called Neon Horizon, where she has actually looked at the way her threads have sat. So we have the feeling of the upright threads coming through here, which pushes us up into the sky, and then the very grounded area with the orangey golds in the background, so that this part here is about the grounding again, and it's settled in the area. So yeah, it's a nice yin-yang feeling to the up and down area with the draping of the threads. So this piece by Alva is really fun. It's nice to have pieces in the show which are quirky but also have quite a good concept behind them, and this is one of those pieces. So it's called the Boyfriend Pillow. And it's a sort of piece you really want to pick up and hug and interact with. And I feel that, with all the different linking of the whole pieces, we have that feeling of the complication of the relationships in our lives. But with the fabrics she's used, we have the sort of patterning here, which has almost like a 70s feel to some of them. So you do have that feeling of looking back in the time, looking back into what's around her that she's used, but we do like the way that the whole piece links in together. And it was a piece that she had said, could be on a plinth or could be on a wall. We rather liked the fact that we chose to suspend it, that you could actually move around and interact with it on different levels. Your eye links through, and the whole thing has been hand stitched, which is really another sense of fun. You have that sense of time, and as we all know, relationships take time. So building on what was there before, each one of those, if you followed it through, would be linked back to another one. So again, it's a little simile to our lives and how relationships move from one thing to another. So it's a fun piece, really quirky, and we liked its sculptural quality. So this work is a collaborative piece with Steph Noldy, Maggie Coco and Michael Noah. So it was the result of a presentation that was held during the Nelson Fringe Festival. And so there's different elements with it that were part of a performance art with song and poetry, and then what is left when a performance is made. We have the remnants left behind, and that's what this piece is referring to. So on the table here, you have pieces of fabric where the people from the audience and the general public had written things onto it, so some of those statements are there, and all the things that are part of it are all part from the other performance they had. So it really invites the viewer to stop and watch the video, look at the considered elements that are part of it, and start to think about how you yourself think about when you've been to a performance, what stays with you, what are the important parts, the fragments that are left behind. So exciting to see something that is looking at a very conceptual way of working. So well done to all three of you. So this is the second piece by Pam McKinley, who gave us Farewell to Haupapa that we talked about before. So Pam works in Dunedin with part of the Art and Science project. So a lot of her work is informed by the conversations she has around her area with scientists and different forms and different types of scientists. This piece, she's combined LED lights with the very coarse woven wool through here, and her piece is about exploring planets and beyond the boundaries of where the planets and the life is going to be. You know, where are we going to be in 20 years, 50 years, 100 years time? You know, how is that going to impact on the environment that we have now? So quite fun to have a piece where the LED is really considered as part of the whole and not just put on the surface afterwards, which is sometimes the case. So yeah, quite a strong panel here through with the different colours and the beading. So yeah, great to have someone thinking outside the box, literally. So this piece is by Norma Slabbert from Hamilton, and Norma always looks at things from a slightly different perspective, and we've enjoyed several entries from her over the past. So this piece, The Colour of War, is really powerful. So we have this large panel in the centre with the gradated effect of the red, which almost references a Rothko type colouring. But here in the background, it looks very simple, but the more you look, the more you see. So she hasn't fallen into the trap of giving us just the expected side of war. She's looked at war and how it works into our communities. So things like the power lines and the traffic lights and the interruption of life. We have these little bits of hope with the roses and the strong colours of the red brought forward. We really enjoyed the way that it's like a collaged background, so it's not just one piece of screen printed fabric, but we have lots of things that are working together, and we enjoyed the way that we have the change of scale here with this very almost graph-like piece of fabric working here and here. So compositionally it's very exciting and your eye keeps moving around, but again that strong red brings us through to focus. And the quilting stitching, which is always magnificent with her work, you know, really starts to look, is it blood dripping? Is it our hope rising? But yeah, it's a very, very well considered piece of work. This is our Supreme Award winner this year, Kate Seller from Ponganui, and really quite a different piece as far as why is this piece a prize winner? Because you look at it and it's quite deceptively quite simple, but we thought it was absolutely outstanding. So from the piece of felt where you started, and she's screen printed onto it, and then she's gone into it to explore mark making with both machine and hand stitching. It's about the lichens in our area, and it's an often overlooked area, and I'll actually read to you what we said on the opening night. So the mission statement for Changing Threads has always been to showcase work which challenges the usual perception of fibre and textile art, and sometimes work which seems simple at first glance invites the viewer to inspect more closely and appreciate the complexity, as is the case with our winning piece. It reflects the theme of concern for the environment by focusing on a small and often overlooked element and an ecological statement, which is the lichens. The way that lichen actually continues to live is to take its nutrient from both the air and from the water around in the air. And so if the lichen is not looking well, it's an indication of the pollution in our environment. So I think as an ecological statement, it's an interesting way of thinking of that as a concept. So on this work, the surface is just textured here, as I've said, but the close inspection shows that even the quieter areas on the plain black have been carefully considered to hold interest. And this poisonous acidy yellow-green with its hidden colours comes through. It's almost blues and almost purples, and there's some wonderful mark making on the surface, and the little details really encourage you to explore it further. So we were really intrigued by this piece, and it was deceptively quiet. You know, you'd come past it and you'd come back to explore it again. So I think that when a piece encourages you to come back and look at it closely again and again, you know, it's a really worthy winner.